The opinions expressed in the following video are not in their entirety endorsed by this podcast. They are instead the focus of our discussion today. This is your content warning.
Theoretically, if my husband came to me and said he felt called to stay at home and maybe just take care of our puppy and I was going to go be the breadwinner for the family, what would you have to say about that?
I mean, that's insane. Mm-hmm. Could you respect a man who didn't go to work?
No, that's why I married a man with a job.
Yeah. If you marry a guy and you go to work and he stays home, what you have is not a husband, but a little brother. And good luck being attracted to that guy. Good luck honoring and respecting that guy. And good luck with him raising daughters who are going to get into a healthy relationship. And good luck for that guy raising sons who are going to grow up to be anything other than a dependent Democrat on the government for the rest of their life. There's an infinitesimal percentage of guys who are stay-at-home dads. Most are just lazy jackalopes and probably running around with the nanny and trying to hook up at the play dates. So those are just nasty guys, and they can go ahead and comment because they got free time, and I won't respond because I'll be at work.
Joshua, it is great to see your smiling face this morning.
I usually don't have a smiling face in the morning, so I'm glad that you got to see it.
Is that what it is? Have you had your coffee? Is that the key?
I am on my third cup, and I'm mad because I broke my mug. I was walking to get coffee, dropped my mug, and it shattered. And so now I have to use, the equivalent of a communion cup for coffee.
The styrofoam. That's up there with, not to trivialize actual bad feelings, but that is one of the worst feelings, right? When you drop something that
for me, I might as well just have the whole pot sitting here to drink out of and skip the cup.
Well, I mean, just when you drop a coffee mug and everything freezes in time, you just have to hope that it doesn't shatter, and inevitably it does. And it's always your favorite. But anyway, good to see you today. And welcome back, man. This is this is season 3, if that's what you want to call it. Season 3, episode 1 is episode 25, which means we've officially been doing this for over 2 years now, which is kind of crazy to think about. But this is your content warning, a Bible Meets Culture podcast where we break down modern theology versus biblical content. I'm Nathan, that's Joshua, and the dashing man who is in the room with us, Dr. Ryan Frazier, has humbly agreed to join us today. One of my favorite professors at Freed-Hardeman. He is also a licensed clinical pastoral therapist. That is a mouthful, but he does full-time teaching as well as, do you call it full-time counseling or part-time counseling?
No, hey guys, no, it's definitely part-time.
Okay. Yeah. So, but thrilled to have you on. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to join us. We thought you were honestly one of the first people that popped into our heads when we started talking about this particular topic and the family, the role of members of the family, family dynamics in general. And it's an exciting topic, not only because, we all have our own families, but because this is a topic that seemingly is brought up, just cycles through over and over and over and over again. What are the roles of husbands, wives, children's, so on and so forth.
That's right.
So, so jumping right into it, our video today is brought to us by Mark Driscoll. If you're unfamiliar with who that is, he's been one of the most, I'm going to say infamous, definitely polarizing characters in the religious community over the last 2 decades, really. He began a church out in Seattle called Mars Hill. If you're unfamiliar with that story, there's a whole podcast that will take you maybe 2 weeks to listen to because of how in-depth it is. But he's currently preaching, we'll say, at a church called Trinity Church in the Phoenix, Scottsdale, Arizona area. And he really prides himself on, I guess, what's the word we use? Clickbaitish, Joshua? Is that the right thing?
That sounds pretty good to me. Yeah.
He's a soundbite guy. He always has been, and he throws out some pretty bold claims today. Before I get you guys' first impressions on the video, I do want to say that if you go and you watch the original video and you look at the full video description, he does give a disclaimer. So he gives the exceptions of men who are disabled, men who are ill, or men who are in full-time school, who do not have jobs. He said those are exceptions, but he's basing the video off of the rule, not the exception. Okay, so we'll just kind of give that bit of clarity because again, we struggle sometimes with these TikTok videos to put them in their entire context and their clarity. So he does give that exception, which I do appreciate. But Joshua or Dr. Fraser, either one, let me get your first impressions on the video as a whole.
Yeah, I'll start. I sent you the video. It was one I was scrolling on Instagram and it came up, and my Instagram there's two videos on it. There's one of stand-up comedians and there's ones of theology and preachers. So I don't know what that tells about me, but that's the algorithm for my videos on Instagram. But when I saw this, I was actually thinking about using some of it for a Father's Day lesson, and wound up not working where I was preaching on Father's Day, so I got to ignore that. But it's like you said, he says things in an interesting way that make you want to listen. They're somewhat provocative. They're very bold and crass and rigid in some senses. The content of what he says can be rather valuable, but the way he says it can come across in a different way where the message is lessened by by how he says it, which is a problem, I think, for a lot of preachers. Or the opposite problem is where we're so gentle that the message isn't received at all. So as Dr. Billy Smith used to say in our preaching classes, you have to find balance. And I don't know that Mark Driscoll found balance in this video, but the content, I am concerned about the message of the content for two reasons. Number one, I think it shows, I think it displays a different view of the family from an ultra traditional realm and does not allow for the possibility of anything else. I'm glad you gave the disclaimer at the beginning about that. I never thought about any of that, but and also I think too, there's such a movement in our society for the heightening of both masculine and feminine roles, be it in marriage or just in life, as a response to maybe the LGBTQ transgenderism movement. And so rather than looking at Scripture and saying, okay, this is what Scripture says a man and a woman should do in a family, we're putting those on super steroids. And I think that can be equally as dangerous. So those are just some preliminary thoughts that I had.
I got you.
I'll jump in, guys. It's great to be with you today. Appreciate the invite. I think it might be good to articulate what's at the heart of the videos. So the question is raised essentially: is it okay for men to be stay-at-home husbands while the wife works outside the home? Or another way to put that, can a dad be a stay-at-home dad or a homemaker? And it's an interesting question, particularly just thinking culturally with the rise of remote and some pretty flexible work models these days. So it's becoming more common for fathers to work from home, to take care of the children while maybe still contributing to family income. But then there's the other side that might be concerning with those that have kind of forsaken their careers to focus on child rearing and maintaining the daily household chores. And so the issue to me is maybe less of an ethical question, or even a theological question, and maybe more of a psychological type of question, just the way that men are wired uh, to work, to have purpose, to have more structure. I know I'm stereotyping a bit here, but in general, I think this idea of a stay-at-home dad in our culture might sound good and well, and there's comments made in behavioral psychology and developmental psych that fathers are just as good at nurturing children as mothers are. That's not been my experience. That's not been my observation. And so I think it raises some other pragmatic questions. Of course, we'll talk about the theological, ethical side, but the psychological aspect and the sociological aspect is maybe in my way of thinking as a counselor and a theology professor, that's more in the crosshairs for me than the theological question about is this morally right or wrong.
Right. No, I love that. To me, when I first watched the video, the first thing that I thought of is something that he does pretty generally is he speaks in very, very broad generalities, and he definitely paints, in my opinion, opposite ends of the spectrum, right? And I think, Joshua, that's kind of what you were hinting at. There tends to be from both sides, right? Any sort of pushback requires me to push back even further. And so what happens is, instead of finding balance under some sort of middle ground, if there is any, we end up pushing ourselves further and further and further to the extremes. And so he paints this picture that, in my opinion, right, the first impression I got from the video was he's painting this picture that if you don't work, you cannot be a good father. You cannot be a good husband. You cannot. You are no doubt going to try to run around on your wife, right, with the nanny. You are going to become. And again, I don't even want to touch on the political statements that he made, because that just seems so far out of the realm of the discussion that I think he just threw it in there just because he knew it was going to get some more sound bites out of it. But I don't like the broad generalities. And again, I understand that you can't necessarily paint every conversation around every single what if that shows up. But I think that it's important to kind of determine some of those things and to understand that there are rules, there are exceptions, but everybody's got their own life story, which kind of brings us into this first little part that I want to talk about. He makes the comment, right, that if you are married to a man who desires to be a stay-at-home dad, right, who desires to not work, is what he says. He says you don't have a husband, you have a little brother. And he says that if that's the case, then, good luck being attracted to that guy. Good luck being able to respect that guy. Good luck having that guy raise daughters or sons that know anything about anything, basically, is what he says. And so that kind of leads us into this first question. What are those family roles that we're supposed to be looking after, right? Because clearly, I think most of us would agree, there's a drastic difference between a husband and a brother. And those roles are very different, even from just a biological standpoint. Those things are incredibly different. And so, give me your take on that, and what are those defined family roles that maybe we have from a psychological perspective or a theological perspective. And then I think that we absolutely have to talk about at some point, and you guys can know this if you want. Those family roles are without a doubt shifting. Anybody that argues that the modern, what I'm going to call the modern family role, or the way a family looks, is absolutely shifted over the last just 5 to 10 years and continues to do so. So give me some of your thoughts on that.
Go ahead, Dr. Frazier.
I'll jump in. I would like just, I think, for a minute to think about just work in general, and how that work has always been part of God's original purpose for which God created people. So really his first words to Adam and Eve were instructions for what they were to do, right? Including subduing the earth, ruling over the creatures, Genesis 1:28. He gives Adam the job of working the garden, taking care of it, Genesis 2:15. One of his first tasks are naming all the animals, Genesis 2:19 through 20. And so work was created before the fall, right? So that's important, before the fall. And it's given to Adam and Eve as part of making their lives meaningful. And there was no paycheck involved, right? So work was part of the purpose for which we were and are created. So my issue, I come back to this, to the bigger question with stay-at-home dads or fathers being, primarily responsible for the chores of maybe child rearing and such like. It, to me, maybe more than a paycheck question, it's a work question. There are guys that stay at home that do an amazing job. I can think of several right now whose wives may be working on their doctorate degree. And so the husband staying at home and is, kind of taking the primary responsibility for this period of time. And it's work. I mean, they're working, they're contributing to the larger picture of their household. I have zero problem with that. I think the flip side are dads that stay at home and play video games all day, or are on pornography all day, or just not really contributing to the well-being of the family. And that's, to me, that's the rub. It's a work question. How are we, people contribute in different ways, and so how are we contributing? Are we contributing, and is it fair? Is it a fair way of providing for our family? We provide in different ways as well. So I think just that, is it equitable? Is there balance in it? Because goodness, staying at home all day, some women are not cut out for that. And it can really be hard work being the primary caregiver for the children. But so those are just some initial thoughts, and I don't think it's got to do with masculinity or femininity. It's just sometimes it's pragmatics and what
Yeah.
needs to be done for this period of time for a
Well,
family.
yeah. And so I just want to hit very briefly on something you said right there, because I've seen in the short amount of work that I've done that when you don't allow for any give and take, when you don't allow for any balance, what you'll find is you've got women who are dead set on being stay-at-home moms, and so that's what they do with their first child or their second child or whatever. They want to be a stay-at-home mom, and they quickly realize that maybe they're not cut out to be a stay-at-home mom.
Mhm.
And then you run into this issue of, well, now they've got to deal with guilt and grief and all these different emotions that come from, I think, in a lot of their minds, a sense of failure, right? Like,
Maybe.
we've propped up this idea that if you want to be a good mother, you have to be able to stay at home with your children and take care of them.
And if you don't think that postpartum depression is contributed to by that, just that setup and that expectation that people have externally, maybe internally, think again. I mean, that can really contribute to a woman being at the end of her rope,
Right.
emotionally.
Yeah, and like I said, I think that's the danger of taking it to the extreme when you're defining what those family. Because, and again, not to get too far off base, right? Because there are definitely theological principles and roles that God has established for the family, and so maybe role is not the right term, but each family has different dynamics to it, right? Maybe that's a better word than role. And I think when you pigeonhole, for lack of a better term, somebody in those specific dynamics that maybe don't work for your family, you also do way more harm than good.
Yeah. Let me jump in here real quick, Nathan.
Yeah.
There's one thing that the video begins with that I think is really important for us to remember when we talk about this is Mark Driscoll begins with saying, if your husband comes to you, speaking to the wife, and says, I have a calling to be a stay-at-home husband, I think that frames it differently. Now, we're not going to get into callings and what that is or isn't, but it does seem that from the outset in the video, there's an underlying reason for this man to want to stay at home, and that it's God leading him into this. And whether that's an excuse to stay at home and play video games all day, or run around with the nanny, or be on the computer with pornography or whatever, or whether it's a truly God-led thing, that's something that is debatable based on situation. But another thing too, and Dr. Fraser brought this up, and you expounded on it too, Nathan, is man was called to work in Genesis 2, but woman was created to help man in that work. And you have many instances throughout both the Old and New Testaments of women who are working. So there's a movement now in many different aspects of church, and I'll put church in air quotes, to say women don't need to work. They need to stay home. They need to be homemakers. And any other thing besides that is an offense against God. And I think we'll look at Proverbs 31 and the virtuous woman who works, who with her own income bought a field so that she could work to produce certain things. And that with that work, her husband is blessed. I don't know what to make of her husband. He's well known in the city gate, verse 23 says, but it doesn't seem that he is one working. She's the one working, and he's the one receiving glory. He's blessed because of her. But then you also have something else, which is those that feminine quality of being a homemaker and a masculine quality of being the one who provides. And I remember a conversation I had early on in my ministry career with a very dear lady who I'm very good friends with. She's a member here, and I was just getting to know her at the time, and I said, "Well, what did you do for a living?" And at the time, she wasn't working, and she said, "Well, I was a stay-at-home mother." Well, stay-at-home insert role is a job, and I very firmly believe that, whether it's stay-at-home father or whether it's stay-at-home mother, but just stay at home is not. Right. So there has to be some kind of defining role there. So I think the issue is a lot broader than what we might see on the surface. That's really what I wanted to say.
I'd like to jump in too. I think about just a couple of other biblical examples. I think about Aquila and Priscilla, both tent makers, working side by side with the Apostle Paul there in Corinth. I think about Lydia, seller of purple in Philippi in Acts 16. So we see some different roles, but coming back to just the way that we were created, just as God models an incredible work ethic even in the creation. And to me, a big part of man's, and when I say man, I mean males, personal identity and our self-worth is pretty closely connected to our work, to our career. It does provide structure, it provides purpose, meaning, balance, rhythm to our life. It's a way for us to contribute for the benefit of society as a whole, as well as provide for our family. And there's that old saying, "Idle hands are the devil's workshop." So I don't think we're talking about that. We're talking about maybe situations where men are staying at home, are the primary kind of running the household while the wife is working. Maybe she's a medical doctor, or maybe she is an attorney or something along those lines. And so trying to bring balance there. But irrespective of that, the husband definitely needs to have a role, definitely needs to have a job to do, whether it's at home or outside the home. And I will say this, I'm going to put my neck out here, but I think I can pretty confidently say that most men, probably 95% of men, I'm making up a statistic, are not cut out for staying at home. Yep. Most men are not cut out. Men traditionally have been the hunters, gone out. They need to be away sometimes from family to come back. There's that old saying, absence makes the heart grow fonder. Most men are not wired for that. There are some that are, but I think men might say, "Hey, I'm gonna come and I'm gonna stay. I want to be a stay-at-home dad for a while." I would like to interview those guys after a couple of years and see how satisfied they are.
Yeah,
for sure.
To that point, Dr. Frazier, I just share a quick story. my wife is a nurse, and right now, a travel nurse working in hospitals can make around roughly $100 an hour. And we have very seriously considered pursuing that path for her to, and you have to live within 100 miles of the hospital to be considered travel. But, if she was to go to somewhere like Knoxville or Huntsville, that'd be a 4-hour, 3-hour drive, from where we live, and it wouldn't be terrible. We don't have children yet, and so that would be another factor that wouldn't be a problem. But I say all that to say this: we were talking, and Nathan and I have a mutual friend who married a woman who is a travel nurse, and they have a truck and camper, and they travel the United States, and she works. He also works. I don't know exactly what he does, but he also has a job. And my wife and I were talking about that. She said, yeah, but if we did that, you wouldn't have to work. I was like, maybe not, but I would still be finding something to do.
I need to work.
I need to work. And I'm in full agreement. I think that there are so many men who just have that God wiring in our brains to where there's something that needs to be done. There's somewhat need to be productive. And it doesn't. Okay, Nathan, I'm sorry to hijack the podcast.
No,
but, okay, so while we were talking, I had this thought come up, and I hope it doesn't derail us too much. But I'm very, very curious from a clinical or a counseling perspective. What would we say to those men who might be listening to this, and they do work, but their wives make considerably more than they do, and they feel like they need to go maybe pursue a different career path, a different degree, or whatever, so that they could be, quote unquote, the breadwinner, that their figures have to be more than their wives. What might we say to a man like that?
I would say, quit being prideful. I would say that's ridiculous. I would say, be thankful for the amount of money your wife makes. That's great.
Amen.
Yeah, that is so silly. And it has to do with pride, I think, and that machismo of men. From a biblical perspective, we do know that, men are called to contribute. It doesn't say that we're to be the primary, contributor. I think about, for example, in First Timothy 5:8, says, but if anyone does not provide for his relatives, and especially for members of his household, he's denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. So there is a calling to provide, but it doesn't say anything about out providing the wife. There are many very capable women out there that are able to, bring in the dough. And I love it when I see men that are humble enough, and these are macho guys, but they're humble enough to go, man, I've married a great woman,
yes.
And not to feel like this is some sort of competition or that this is emasculating in some way as the husband.
Yeah. Well, so that kind of leads us into this next part that I kind of want to talk about, because we mentioned that there are family roles or dynamics rather that are shifting, right? And they've shifted quite a bit. And we've kind of tiptoed around it, I'm going to say, but because in the video, right, the girl that's asking him this question says, hey, my husband has a calling that I want to stay home and I want to take care of the dog, and you go be the breadwinner, right? However you want to phrase that. And so I guess there's a clear line that we get to define, that we've kind of hinted at it, right? But is there a difference? And I think we would all say that there is, between a stay-at-home dad and a dad who just wants to stay at home, right? Does that make sense? Like there's a difference there. And I think, Dr. Fraser, you mentioned this, that there is the crux of that is the meaning behind, or the why behind you doing what you're doing, right? Because, and that again, you can go to both ends of that argument, right? Am I staying at home, the why being I'm lazy, or am I staying at home because I don't feel as though that there's a better person equipped to teach and take care of my family than me, right? And the pride may very well work its way into that, but you also have to take it to the other. Am I a family that I'm refusing to have a stay-at-home parent at all because I want to live a life that two incomes, right? So, and I don't mean this in like, I understand that, especially nowadays, oftentimes it takes a two income house to support a
Most of
life,
the
like
time.
even a minimum lifestyle, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or are am I working as a dad or as a mom because I don't want to embrace some of those parental responsibilities that I have? Am I looking to live a life of excess? And that's why I'm avoiding. And again, I think the issue becomes, and we'll get into this a little bit later. Rather, I think the issue becomes the video feels, Mark, to me feels like there's not a danger in work, right? And I understand that work is a good thing. I think that Ecclesiastes 9:10 paints that picture, right? If you're going to do anything, you're supposed to do it with all of your might. Um, but I think there's also a danger of maybe working too much, and I don't want to devalue maybe the idea of a stay-at-home parent, right? Whether it's a mom or a dad. And so the thing that I'm curious about, and I say all that, I feel like I'm rambling. I say all that, Dr. Frazier, because I'm curious about this. Have you seen a psychological impact on families whose dynamics shift, right? Like maybe the mom, maybe those dynamics flip flopped, right? The dad was working and something happened, and now he's staying at home while the wife works, or
Yeah.
is what's the psychological impact on the shifting family dynamic that we're seeing all across the country, in the church, so on and so forth?
It's definitely challenging, Nathan, and let me address something you said a moment ago. You didn't use this term, but there can be there can be a sense of workaholism, which is addictive. Oftentimes, it's the person gets all of their identity, the sum total of their identity from their career, maybe from the power or the prestige that comes from it. I think about 1 Timothy 6:9, but those who desire to be rich fall into temptation, into a snare, into many senseless and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. So there's that aspect, some of the danger of people working just to have more stuff, and that materialistic drive that's there. So let's get that out the way. That's sinful, right? To make that the god of your life, the god of your family is stuff, the bigger bank account, the bigger boat, the bigger house, fancier car. Um, on on the other side, your question, is there, when there's a shift in the family dynamic and in the roles, how does that work? Well, it depends. It depends on how it's managed. Um, I think there's an inherent pothole in danger when couples make when a unilateral decision is made. Hey, this is the way it's going to be from this day forward. We're going to be in these roles. I was talking with my wife this morning on this topic, and boy, Missy ought to be part of this conversation. She had some really profound, insightful things to say, and I really am curious what a woman would say to this topic. But a comment that Missy made, and I think it's true, is that when a decision is made to make a shift, maybe by necessity, it needs to be time proscribed. So it's, hey, let's do this for 6 months and then reevaluate.
Right, like your free trial, right?
Let's reevaluate, because um, sometimes it's a glorious thing and it works out great. Other times it just does not work out too great, and it opens up a host of temptations, and maybe self-esteem struggles for the husband coming home, a sense of I just don't know what I'm doing here at home. So I would take it on a case by case, but does it impact the psychological well-being? Can it? Most definitely, it can, and that's why we shouldn't bite off more than we can chew. And if couples are thinking about this, and I'm talking with them and doing marriage counseling or career counseling, we're going to talk about, the art of negotiation, with these aspects, and then just reassessing, going, is this working for us? What do we need to do that's best for our family as a whole? And not just think about the short term, but what about the long term? What are going to be the intended and some of the unintended consequences of this?
As you were talking, one of the things that went through my mind, you talked about the dynamics that could play. Because I pictured this when I was kind of prepping for this video. I thought if I decided to stay at home, I don't know that I would, but if I was staying at home and my wife was out working and was coming home every day to me and our two boys, I honestly feel as though it would cause more stress on her because of the way that I would do everything, right? Like now all of a sudden the organization's different, the towels are folded different, the sheets are, backwards or whatever the case may be. And so, yeah, I think it's a great point. Every single case is different. Every single dynamic is different. But I did want to ask this question to both of you. So,
can I just say one thing? Several years ago, my wife was working outside the home at the time and full-time career in education. I was doing my work in ministry. And I made some comment about the laundry not being done. And her response, I've learned not to mess with her. Her response was, okay, if you're having a problem with the laundry, it's all yours. And so for about 3 months, I did all the laundry. And at the time, we were in foster care. We had 5 kids in the home. Some clarification on that. After about 3 months, I was absolutely begging for mercy, right? With that. So I would not do really well if that was my primary job, because that's a never, and some of those household chores, the dishes, the laundry, never ending.
Mm-hmm.
And those of you that do it,
for sure,
that can grind you into the ground. And so you've got to be wired a certain way to be able to do that.
I was saying every single one of those things is nuanced, right? I've talked to husbands who, have come in and said, hey, I tried to do the laundry because I noticed it was getting backed up, and I did it, and my wife got mad at me because it made her feel guilty for not doing the laundry, and
sure,
everything is so nuanced when it comes to the family dynamic. It's really a just I can't find the right word for it. Like interesting just doesn't feel like it is it encapsulates enough of it. But the way a family operates is just a constantly evolving thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did want to ask this question though, as we kind of move on here just for a second. The way that family dynamic shifts, the way that we've seen culture move into a realm of maybe redefining roles for each other in a family, parents, children, husbands, wives. Is that a danger to the church, right? Is that something, because we see this, I think, quite a bit. And I think this is where Mark is coming from. I think that's why this video is made the way that it is because it appears as though the way that culture, right, the way that the video is kind of portrayed is that the redefining of family roles in culture are encroaching their way into the church, and that is a detriment or that is a threat to the way the church is designed to operate. So I want to get y'all's. I'm Southern. I want to get y'all's opinion on that. All y'all, whatever. So whoever wants to go first, by all means, start swinging.
Well, is it a detriment? It has the potential to be if men are no longer willing to take up the mantle and do the responsibilities that God has put on them. It is very much my view, and I'm pretty sure I have scripture to back this up. I would argue that I do, that men are called to be the spiritual leaders in all instances. That, broadly speaking, would be to the church and the home. And in scripture, when you see women stepping up and being the spiritual leaders, it is typically because there are no men who are taking up the mantle to be the spiritual leaders. And so when God hands spiritual leadership over to women and babies, men are not doing their job. So I'm very much an advocate for male spiritual leadership in the church and the home. If men become lazy, which I think is at the heart of the problem with the question in the video, do you want to just stay home? It's like what you said, Nathan. Do you want to be a stay-at-home husband, or do you want to be a husband who stays at home? There is a difference. And if laziness creeps in, and we neglect to do that principle of Colossians 3:17, where we're doing all things, or whatever you do in word or deed, you're doing it to the name of the Lord. Well, I don't. Maybe one of you can correct me. I don't see how you can sit at home on your rear end watching TV all day, playing video games, or being involved in sin, if we want to go that far, and say that I'm doing that in the name of the Lord. I don't see that principle coming out. So I do think that in the church today, we are starting to see some of that. We're seeing men who are lazy. We're seeing men who are not willing to preach the truth of the gospel. And I'm not saying that you should preach it harshly or crudely, but we're seeing men take a back seat to the way that the church and the home are run. And it's a very popular topic now with the masculine movement and what it is. But I do think that it can become very, very dangerous to the church if men become unwilling to lead. And that's really what the issue is for me, is the issue of leadership.
Well, and we talked about a few episodes back. If you want to go back and listen to the episode that we did on women's roles with Dr. Danny Petrillo, we talked a little bit about how culture seems to be kind of swinging that other way, right? That for whatever reason, culture is trying to, for a variety of reasons, culture is trying to thrust women into positions of leadership in the name of equality, right? And we talked about how equality and the different roles that God established for us can coexist very, very happily. But Joshua, you're right. I would love to see. I don't know if there's any. I didn't look any into it before this particular episode. I would love to see research on, if Barna Group or somebody did research on the number of men in today's church that are willing to serve as elders and deacons versus 20, 30 years ago. Because it seems that my research, in the sense of those that I talk to, it seems to be that's a growing trend, right? I know that the statistic is put out just about every year. I think the most recent says that we've got 600 pulpits that are emptying every single year, and we're putting 300 preachers every year into that workforce as far as being able to minister to congregations. And Joshua, I think you're right. I think that there is a trend where, and I think this is why it's becoming so popular and why those roles are becoming so skewed. There is a trend where there are women who are willing to step into those roles, even though God has not defined them that way, because men aren't. And I think that there are men that are becoming more and more comfortable allowing women to step into those roles where God says that they don't need to be.
Yeah, let me say one more thing before we get Dr. Fraser's thoughts. There is a place where, and it's very apparent in Scripture, where the man's responsibility to his household impacts his leadership in the church. That's the whole thing about elders. If a man cannot run his house, that's why a man who's going to be an elder has to be a husband, and he has to be a father, because if he can't run his own household, how is he going to run the household of God? That's what Paul says. So there is a place where the man should be present in the home, should carry some of those at-home burdens, if I can call them that, and be active in the life of his children. And one more thing before we let this go is with.
So we're going to touch on that in just a second too, because okay. I want to. That's my big crux with the video and as a whole. But go ahead.
Well, with the position of leadership and men, it's not to say, and this is something that we try to make clear in the videos that we do about these topics. It's not to say that women, that because men have the place of leadership in the home and the church, that women have no place in the home and the church. They certainly do, but God has given us the tasks at hand, and it's our job to be submissive to that God-given task to the best of our abilities. Okay?
Amen. Yeah, there definitely are biblical roles given related to spiritual leadership. And when you've got a vacuum of leadership in the home and in the church, it is going to be filled with, by women, or at least in some religious groups now, with the gay lesbian movement, issues surrounding that. We know the big issues in the Methodist Church currently surrounding that.
Yeah.
But men are called to lead. Men are to lift holy hands in prayer, it says. And, I think, again, just coming back to the original topic on working, on leading, on having purpose, 2 Thessalonians 3:10-12 says, "For even when we were with you, we would give you this command: if anyone's not willing to work, let him not eat. For we hear that some among you walk in idleness, not busy at work, but busy bodies. Now such persons we command and encourage in the Lord Jesus Christ to do their work quietly and to earn their own living." That verse is tied into just our calling to work, our calling to, as men and women, to work, had to have responsibility. But particularly when it comes to leadership, as men, I appreciated Joshua referring to First Timothy 3. The idea with the eldership, and men needing to lead at home. And some of the statistics right now have been startling to me. In the last 2 or 3 years, Lifeway Publishing, their research arm, did some research on fathers that are spiritual leaders in the home versus those that are not spiritual leaders in the home. Even when the wife is really, really faithful, takes the kids to church and leads in that way. But the stats that came out, it showed that fathers, and that's why fathers are called in Ephesians 6 to lead in the home, to train up the child in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. When dads are not doing that, the aftermath as children age out of the home and leave the church, it is astounding, the percentages. And I don't have those right in front of me right now, but dads need to lead in their work, in their teaching, in their training, and the family is a microcosm of the church. If it's not happening in the family, it's not going to be happening in the church.
Yeah. And that kind of brings us to this last point. Well, there's two more things I want to get at. One is my biggest crux of the whole video, and then, as we always do, we want to round it back to what does the Bible say. But my biggest issue with the whole video is I think we've kind of said this before, is the lack of balance, right? Because the video definitely portrays this idea that having a job is what makes you a good husband or a good dad. And I think that there is a massive danger in that. Just because you have a job does not make you a worthwhile anything. Just because you have a job does not make you a good dad. Just because you have a job does not make you a good husband. Just because you have a job doesn't make you a good person. It doesn't make you, you could argue that having a job might make you slightly less likely to have an affair with your wife if you have a job that causes you to work 75 hours a week. Maybe you just don't have time for it, right? But I think that there is a massive danger in attaching the value of being a husband and father to just having a job. Does that make sense?
Yeah. To your point, Nathan, having a job could make you a bad person.
Absolutely.
If you're working 75 hours a week and your secretary is there the entire time, the opposite of what you said could certainly happen.
Well, so I'll give you the example. One of the comments on the original video, on the original post I went back and looked at, one of the comments talked about how it was a woman. And again, maybe this is the exception. Maybe this is a much more frequent thing than we realize. But she made the comment about how she said for sure, and she was being sarcastic. You could read the sarcasm. I know it's difficult at times. You could read the sarcasm through her comment, but she said absolutely. She said our breadwinner missed bedtimes, birthdays, special occasions, hospital visits, plays, recitals, ball games, etc., because they were out being a good father. And I again, that's what that was my whole issue with the video. And again, not that everything, and again, it really irritates me to admit it, but not everything that comes out of his mouth is always terrible, right? But when you paint this picture that the sole purpose of your life is to work, right, and that's the only value that you have as a husband or a father, um, that does an incredibly inadequate job of depicting what a biblical man is supposed to look like.
Well, if I can play on your words, Nathan, the sole purpose of life is to work, but it's to work at being a husband. It's to work at being a father. It's to work at being an employee or a boss. It's to work at your education. It's to labor for those things that are higher, that you set your mind on things above and do all things to the glory of God. So, I have not had as much opportunity as probably both of you to do premarital counseling or any kind of marriage counseling in my ministry. I'm not qualified to do any type of advanced type of counseling at all. But what little premarital counseling I've done usually begins with, you need to realize marriage is work, right? That's part of it. Marriage is finding someone who can put up with your mess and then trying to live your life to keep the mess orderly and clean. That's a good way to think about it, in my opinion. So that said, life is work, but if you're boiling it down, like you said, Nathan, to your validation as a man in particular, boiled down to your job, I do think that can make you a bad person. It goes back to what Dr. Fraser said a little while ago about workaholism, setting that as the idol in your life. I think it becomes a pride thing too, making that your self gratification. And it comes back to me for the Christian to how much, we talk about the fruit of the spirits, and I'm a big proponent on language, and it's one singular fruit. It's not the fruits of the spirit. It's singular in Greek and in English. But all of these things make up the one fruit. But several commentators have noted that self-control being last is sort of the icing on the cake, that without self-control, you can't really have love. You can't really have joy or peace or long suffering. You have to have that self-control. And I think it comes back to our role as Christians, particularly with our job and our families, that we need to be self-controlled. We need to be disciplined people. And that's not something you hear a lot today. Today, it's being promoted. Just go do whatever you want and everything will be fine. Well, I think the Lord calls us to discipline and to lead disciplined lives and to have a disciplined family and to have a disciplined life in church and our religious, spiritual side of life. And that's missed a lot in what we talk about a lot with the role of men. So I think it comes down to that.
Am I supposed to say something
If you
more?
want to add anything, by all means.
No, I think Joshua is spot on, and appreciate those sentiments, about our work and our self-discipline, self-control. I think I like the term holistic. We need to look at men holistically. We need to look at fatherhood, husbandhood holistically. What's the big picture? It's not just one thing that makes for a good husband or a good father or a good provider. It's the big picture. It's a lot of little things, doing a lot of little things right, and striking that that balance. And it doesn't. I think Driscoll's the flaw in his argumentation is it's almost an all or nothing, and it doesn't have to be all or nothing. Um, I've heard if you've got two options, A or B, go find the third option, C, which is going to be a more well-balanced approach uh, to, I think, just viewing families, viewing our couples' work, and viewing what it means to be not just a man, but what does it mean to be a man of God?
For sure. There's a guy named Wayne Jones. I don't know if either of you know who that is, but Wayne Jones is a professor at Bear Valley. He has a podcast. He's not paying me to say this. It's just a shameless plug. But if you want to go listen to his podcast called Authentically Adam, run by the Light Network, it's really, really good. And he has a lot to say. The whole purpose of his podcast is to identify what that man of God looks like. But you said anything about the idea that Mark Driscoll paints this picture of it being all or nothing. That's his MO. I mean, that's what gets you clicks. That's what gets you views. That's what gets you popular. And at the end of the day, I don't necessarily want to be that guy that places motives on him, but he's got enough recorded past and currently present. He's going through all the same issues at Trinity right now that he was going through at Mars Hill, but that's what gets you paid in his line of work. And so, but I think Dr. Fraser, you hinted at something, that idea of what is being a man of God. We always like to round about and say, what does the Bible say about it? And unfortunately, you guys have quoted all of the verses that I've written down here throughout the course of the discussion. So I thought this is why we invite on guys that are way smarter than me. No, the one that I wrote down is the Second Thessalonians chapter 3. The importance of work, but the importance of work to the extent of, look, being a busybody is no good. And it doesn't benefit anybody. In fact, it actually is very counterproductive to the work of the church, to your work as part of a family, to your Christian life as an individual. And so, yes, there's absolutely value in working. But the way we define that work, I think, has a much broader spectrum than what Mark or even some members of the Lord's Church want to put around it. So there you go. That's the only one I've got. I'm not going to repeat every single one that y'all have already rattled off. So
I've got another one that I want to throw out there.
Yeah, go for it.
It'll be my last hoorah on this podcast. But Colossians 3:23-24. Whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord and not for men, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the inheritance as your reward. You are serving the Lord Christ. And in our families, that's who we're serving, whether we're in our home or outside of our home in the workplace. I think keeping that in mind, and that's very, I think, closely tied to Nathan, the verse you had quoted from, I think, Ecclesiastes 9:10. That's what this is all about. How can we, rather than pigeonholing or stereotyping, how can we use godly wisdom to be men that are called to a, and we've not used this term, but this is an older term that comes up, but called to a vocation of spiritual leadership, a vocation of spiritual parenting, a vocation of being a spiritually minded leader in the home and in the church and in the workplace as well. So we do have that responsibility and that privilege and blessing. God crowned man as the crown of his creation. We have that blessing, that privilege of being leaders and of being good men, because good men make a huge difference.
Yeah. I'll say one more thing, and that'll be my last hoorah, to borrow from Dr. Fraser's words. There are two things in the Bible that are always put in the negative, and that's laziness and debt. The Bible says nothing good about laziness and nothing good about debt. Now, that's not to say that the Bible doesn't say good things about rest. Rest implies work. So, not to make those two connections, but we've said it all over. But the motive: are you a lazy individual? And if you are, what could you do today to rectify that problem. And no one can make you do anything. It starts with you. And you can sit here and listen to this podcast for an hour, and it can be motivating to you, but motivation doesn't work because motivation's here today and gone tomorrow. So it's got to be something that ignites in your spirit to say, I'm going to be the man of God that God wants me to be. And if you're a woman listening to this, I would also say, if you're struggling with this with your husband, if your husband is lazy, do what Peter says to the wives there, that with a quiet and gentle spirit, with your example, you can lead, you can win your husband. And I certainly believe that, seen it happen many times. So that'll be all I have to say about that.
For sure. Well, I'm not going to add anything. I think you guys wrapped it up pretty well. Dr. Fraser, again, thank you so much for being on with us today. As always, guys, be sure to, wherever you're listening to this or watching this, be sure to like, subscribe, share it, tell your friends about it, put it on social media. We don't have the prettiest of faces, but we do appreciate it when people share us with their friends and family, right? And so if you're ever in the West Tennessee, specifically Obion County area, come by and see me. If you're ever over in Rutherford County in Murfreesboro, you can go see Joshua. And if you're ever in the Henderson, Tennessee area, if you're in need of like some crisis counseling, I know a guy down there.
Don't come see me.
But anyway, as always, guys, thank you so much for listening. And until next time, we'll see you.